In this sixth astrophysics video, we will discuss how stars evolve while they are on the main sequence. So, for a good understanding of the subject, it is essential that you are familiar with the pre-main sequence stage. If this is not your case, I recommend that you watch the video that appears in the upper right corner of the screen before proceeding. As always on this channel, you can expect a clear and concise explanation of each topic. Please don't forget to click on the like button, subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell. Your support is crucial for our channel's growth and enables us to continue creating quality content. Thank you in advance for your support. In the previous video, we discussed the steps from the initial collapse of a molecular cloud to the pre-main sequence, which marks the birth of a star, ending the video with the stars landing on the main sequence. So, let's start this video by making a brief summary of the previous video. When a star forms, it happens because a cloud of hydrogen gas begins to contract under the force of gravity. This creates a hot, dense protostar at the center of the cloud. The outer layers of the stars are pressing in on the core. This in turn compresses the gas more. As you try and compress a gas, it exerts a gas pressure back. It resists the compression. In stars, this gas pressure alone is not sufficient to withstand the gravitational collapse. Once the core temperature has reached about 10 million Kelvin, fusion of hydrogen occurs, releasing energy. This energy exerts an outward radiation pressure due to the action of the photons on the extremely dense matter in the core. The radiation pressure combined with the gas pressure balance the inward pull of gravity, preventing further collapse. The star stabilizes and reaches a state called hydrostatic equilibrium. The star now has a fixed mass, and its energy comes only from nuclear fusion and not from gravitational contraction. It is now a main sequence star. Its mass will determine its future evolution. The fusion of hydrogen nuclei with the release of nuclear energy, known as hydrogen burning, is the main source of energy generation in main sequence stars. In this process, the net effect is to turn 4 hydrogen nuclei into one helium-4 nucleus. This reaction releases energy due to the fact that the mass of the helium-4 nucleus is slightly less than the mass of the original hydrogen nuclei. The fusion of hydrogen nuclei can be achieved through 2 reaction chains, namely the proton-proton chain and the CNO cycle. These usually occur simultaneously but with relative efficiencies depending on the total stellar mass. The proton-proton chain is the dominant process in all stars with less than 1.5 solar masses, whose core temperatures vary between 5 and 15 10 to 6 Kelvin. This chain has 3 subchains: proton-proton 1, proton-proton 2, and proton-proton 3. The reaction networks involved in the proton-proton chain are the following. 2 protons collide and form a hydrogen isotope, comprising 1 proton and 1 neutron. In this process, a positron and a neutrino are emitted. A further proton then reacts with the hydrogen isotope to make a nucleus comprising 2 protons and 1 neutron. It is thus an isotope of helium called helium-3. A gamma ray is emitted. Two helium-3 nuclei collide to give one helium nucleus, and two protons are released in this reaction to take part in further reactions. This branch of the proton-proton chain is called proton-proton 1. Two other branches of the proton-proton chain can occur in stars. A helium-3 nucleus produced via the first stage of the proton-proton 1 chain undergoes fusion with a helium-4 nucleus, producing beryllium-7 and releasing a gamma photon. The beryllium-7 nucleus then collides with the positron, releasing a neutrino and forming lithium-7. This in turn fuses with the proton, splitting to release two helium-4 nuclei. This branch is called proton-proton 2 and requires the prior existence of helium-4. A rare event is the proton-proton 3 chain, whereby a beryllium-7 nucleus produced as above fuse with a proton to form boron-8 and release a gamma photon. Boron-8 is unstable, undergoing beta-positive decay into beryllium-8, releasing a positron and a neutrino. Beryllium-8 is also unstable and split into two helium-4 nuclei. The proton-proton 1 chain dominates the proton-proton chain for core temperatures between 5 and 8 times 10 to 6 Kelvin. The proton-proton 1 chain is responsible for 85% of the fusion energy released in stars like our Sun. The importance of proton-proton 2 and proton-proton 3 increases with respect to proton-proton 1 for core temperatures above 10 to 7 Kelvin, and if there is a sufficient concentration of helium-4. The proton-proton 2 and proton-proton 3 chains contribute about 15% of the energy output of stars similar to our Sun. If carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen are already present and can act as catalysts, then hydrogen can be synthesized into helium by a completely different series of nuclear reactions. In stars with masses greater than 1.5 solar mass, the core temperatures are above 15 times 10 to 6 Kelvin, and hydrogen burning proceeds through the CNO cycle. In fact, CNO cycle requires 15 million Kelvin to start and only becomes the prominent source of helium nuclei when the temperature reaches 18 million Kelvin. Look at the graph. The relative energy produced by each process is shown on the plot below. Note that above 18 million Kelvin, the CNO cycle contributes most of the energy, and any further slight increase in core temperature leads to a greater increase in energy output. There are 7 CNO cycles. The main branch of the CNO cycle is known as CN cycle. The minor branch as NO cycle, and these are the two dominant cycles for energy production. The remaining branches are only significant for very heavy stars. The reaction networks involved in the CNO cycle are the following. The chain of reactions of the CN cycle starts when a nucleus of carbon-12 fuses with a proton to form nitrogen-13. This nucleus undergoes beta plus decay to form carbon-13. This then fuses with another proton to form nitrogen-14, which in turn fuses with a proton to give oxygen-15. Being unstable, this undergoes beta positive decay to form nitrogen-15. When this fuses with a proton, the resultant nucleus immediately splits to form a helium-4 nucleus and a carbon-12 nucleus. The net result is that 4 protons have been converted into a nucleus of helium-4, with the carbon-12 acting as a catalyst, since it is returned at the end of the cycle. This carbon nucleus is then able to initiate another cycle. In NO cycle, the final reaction shown in CN cycle does not produce carbon-12 and helium-4, but instead produces oxygen-16 and a photon and continues as follows. Nitrogen-15 fuses with a proton to form oxygen-16. This then fuses with another proton and a fluorine nucleus is formed. The resultant nucleus is unstable and undergoes beta-positive decay to form oxygen-17. This then splits to form a helium-4 nucleus and a nitrogen-14 nucleus. The first stage of the proton-proton chain involves the fusion of two protons, whereas in the CNO cycle, a proton needs to fuse a carbon-12 nucleus. As carbon has 6 protons, the Coulomb repulsion is greater in the first step of the CNO cycle than in the proton-proton chain. Nuclei therefore require greater kinetic energy to overcome the stronger repulsion. This means they need to have a higher temperature to initiate a CNO fusion. In more massive stars, strong gravity compresses the hydrogen core to much higher temperatures than in low mass stars. So this explains the fact that the CNO cycle dominates in more massive stars. As a star burns hydrogen into helium, the number of particles decreased, which caused the internal pressure to decrease somewhat. This slight decrease in internal pressure causes the outer layers to contract, and then the core heats up and burns hydrogen at a higher rate. This produces more energy, and therefore the star must release this energy at a more efficient rate, which causes the outer layer to expand. In fact, as a main sequence star ages, its luminosity increases slightly, resulting in it expanding and its outer layer cooling. This explains why the main sequence is a broad band rather than a narrow line. Stars move up slightly and to the right on the main sequence band. Look at the chart above. This video ends here, as the sequence would explain star evolution after the main sequence, and this subject will be covered in the next video.